We're now just a few short weeks from the second anniversary of the signing of the Abraham Accords, but within the celebration, Israel is feeling tense. This as a renewed JCPOA-Iran nuclear deal just moments from ratification, and Jerusalem fearing the peace accords could lose strength under a shadow of a refinanced Iran. So what will become of the new alliances? I'm Asaf Nissan, and joining me to discuss in this special ILTV and Israeli Channel 14 interview, former White House Envoy to the Middle East, author of the book In the Path of Abraham, and host of the podcast Diplomat on Newsweek, Jason Greenblatt. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I wanted to start with the most pressing issues these days, the return to the JCPOA. Do you think the return to the deal is the right step?
No, I think it's a terrible step. First of all, I would even stop framing it as a return to the JCPOA because, frankly, we don't know what's going on there. It's likely to be weaker, and much of the JCPOA time run has already lapsed. So what we'll end up being left with is a weaker agreement, which all but guarantees Iran to have nuclear weapons. It gives Iran crazy amounts of money with which to foment terrorism against Israel through Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad.
We know Iran doesn't follow the IAEA demands and even turns off their camera in the sites.
Indeed, I think we've seen Israel actually prove that Iran was cheating under the original JCPOA. It's a very dangerous thing for us to do. It's really dangerous for Israel, really dangerous for its friends and not yet friends in the Middle East, and dangerous for the United States. The only one it's not dangerous for, sort of, is Europe, because they'll make a lot of money off this deal, which is why they're fighting hard for it. But I hope they're watching for these drones that Iran is supplying to Russia, and Russia is then using to attack Ukraine right on the European continent.
Now, speaking of the European Union, one of Iran's conditions to rejoin the deal was that the U.S. won't be able to pull out of the deal again, and the European Union gave assurances to it. Can they really?
Right. No, it's an excellent question. I'm sort of frankly surprised that the Iranians are not focusing on it. I'm not aware of any way that President Biden himself can get into this deal and not allow the next president or Congress to pull out of the deal. I think what Iran might be getting is a short reprieve of the JCPOA. And if the new occupant of the Oval Office wants to get rid of it, or new Congress, I think they're going to get rid of it very quickly. So this whole thing does seem to be a complete waste of time. It's really more just kicking the can down the road and buying a little bit of time.
Then why is the Biden administration so hell-bent on getting Iran back to the nuclear deal?
It's very hard to explain. I think they're looking for a political win. I think if they were to sign it, they would be able to say, well, we've kept America safe. But the subtitle should be, we've kept America if Iran really doesn't cheat for a very short period of time. And then the Middle East would become even messier, even more dangerous. It's Afghanistan all over again, but on steroids.
One of the conditions Iran stated for rejoining the JCPOA is their assets will be unfrozen. Is this really a good call?
No, it's a terrible move. Look what they did with it when we gave them all that money under the Obama administration. Missiles were flying toward Israel, towards the UAE, towards Saudi Arabia. You know, missiles hit an important oil production facility in Saudi Arabia. Imagine what happens now with oil prices. Yes, they're creeping downward a little bit, but we have serious oil pricing issues. Imagine what that does to the world when they start to use that money again to make terrorism even worse than it is today, and it's pretty bad today.
So if the U.S. is ready to go back to the deal, thus weakening the Abraham Accords?
It could be, and that's what I covered a lot in my book. The region is very nervous. They were nervous when we came into the region under the Trump administration because they felt that the Obama administration had totally abandoned them. They're feeling that way now, and at the same time, you're seeing moves to restore diplomatic relations between Iran and some of the Gulf countries, and I don't blame them. I think if they don't know where the wind is blowing and they feel like they're going to be stuck with the Iran deal, which is very, very possible, I think that they need to do something to, in some way, partner with Iran, and that could undermine the Abraham Accords. I hope that the friendship and the business ties and everything else that is developed between the countries and Israel will withstand this change. But if the Biden administration continues down this path, and if it doesn't pick up more than what it did on its trip and respect our friends and allies, in particular Saudi Arabia, a lot of things could change and go in a bad direction.
Now, we've seen President Biden has also visited the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and tried to restart the relationship with MBS. Could this be another attempt to hitch the wagon on your success?
Indeed. So until President Biden's recent trip, I think that he completely messed up the relationship with Saudi Arabia. He was disrespectful to Saudi Arabia, disrespectful to the Crown Prince himself. The Israel angle was a little bit shaky, uncertain. I think on his trip, he tried hard to maintain the U.S.-Israel relationship. I give him good points for saying the right things. I think he did some really good things when, he had good remarks when he met with the Holocaust survivors. But then again, with the Palestinians, and maybe we'll get to this later in this interview, I think he messed up big time. As it comes to Saudi Arabia, he did go there. He had that famous fist bump, and I think he began to turn a page in that relationship in a positive direction. But I think he still has a long way to go with Saudi Arabia to reignite that relationship in a positive direction.
How do you see the Abraham Accords 2 years after the signing of the agreement?
I think it's been great. I think that on a government to government level, the relationships are warm, they're honest, they're open, they continue to grow. So all of that has been very, very positive. I think even on the business side, it's been positive. I think it's going to take time for the cultures to mesh. I think the business cultures are a bit different, but I think each side is learning each other, and over time that will happen as well. It's happening slowly but surely, and culturally things are happening. So far, the progress has been very, very positive.
Another issue you worked on closely was the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and even presented the plan of the century for peace between both sides. Why do you think the current administration didn't try to adjust it to their own needs? Was there anyone to talk to?
Look, we're not the first that the Palestinians have spurned. In fact, we were one of many in a long line of possible deals for the Palestinians. I think the difference in our proposal is ours was extraordinarily detailed. It wasn't just sort of a couple of words on each issue and then hope and pray that the parties would be able to work together. I do give the Biden administration credit that they're not pushing an Israeli-Palestinian peace deal. They've all but said, perhaps even said directly, that the time is not right, and I think that's true. But they are making all sorts of moves that make me very uncomfortable. One, President Biden did on his visit to Israel, where he visited the East Jerusalem hospital without an Israeli presence.
Now, speaking of Israel and the Palestinians, I want to ask something that was mentioned in Jared Kushner's book, talking about the sovereignty of Israel over Judea and Samaria. In his book, Kushner says that Ambassador David Friedman pushed for annexation and greenlit Netanyahu to go forward with the process without getting approval from the White House. From your experience, something like this could have happened?
So first of all, let me say I was in favor of extension of Israeli law or sovereignty over those areas that we put forth in the plan would be Israel. I still agree that then Prime Minister Netanyahu traded that suspension of that, meaning it's not a permanent move, but a suspension of that for the Abraham Accords. I think that was wise. As to the disagreement perhaps between Jared and David, both of whom are friends, I trust them both. I can only say this because I wasn't in the room. The Bibi Netanyahu that I know, that I met with for countless hours, always made clear that that would be an essential component of any deal if he were to take it. So it surprises me if something changed where he said he didn't need it or didn't want it or it wouldn't happen. But since I wasn't in the room, I can't comment with any certainty. I can only comment on the countless times I spoke to Bibi Netanyahu, where he was crystal clear about his expectations in terms of application of Israeli law or extension of Israeli sovereignty. And for those of your listeners who don't know this, we shouldn't use the word annexation. That's technically an incorrect word.
In addition, Kushner said in his book that during the time of the decision of moving the U.S. Embassy, you and he were not permitted to the room by John Kelly. Why was that?
So John Kelly said that he didn't want 3 observant or Orthodox Jews as part of the decision. On the one hand, it bothered me. On the other hand, it was only one step of many in terms of that decision. That decision, I don't want to say changed over time, but there were so many times when that decision was being discussed, so many times when it was challenged, even multiple times after that meeting. That was a critical meeting, but so many times after that meeting, the volumes of calls that President Trump got, Jared got, I got, from world leaders threatening about what might happen if he went through with it. There were so many key decision points. In the end, it really didn't matter that we weren't in that room, because ultimately the fight to make sure that it happened, not with President Trump, he had always promised it and went through with it, but with so many people who were trying to undermine the decision, continued until moments before the decision. So I think John Kelly, it was a strange decision for me. It probably bothered me at the moment, but since ultimately we still had to keep working on it, it ended up not being so relevant, that decision.
Now, I want to change it up a bit and ask about the FBI raid at Mar-a-Lago, along with the Fed saying that Trump took classified documents from the White House. Reports are coming out saying that Trump took the documents and traded information with Russia. How does the FBI even make such a claim?
Yeah, I've seen those ridiculous stories. So again, I'm not in the room. I don't know what these documents are. What I do know is so far there's no smoking gun. I'm seeing a lot of breathless reporting by reporters saying that he stole nuclear secrets, that he was going to sell them. That's not the President Trump that I know, the President Trump that I worked for. If he took documents, the President Trump that I know took them because either he declassified them or he felt that they were his, or perhaps it was a mistake. And I can't say with any certainty, but what is unfortunate is that this thing is being tried in the press, meaning the press is writing all sorts of stories without any kind of backing. And I think we need to take a step back and wait, see what happens, and let's get the truth out. And if the truth is similar to some of those stories, then so be it. And let's see what happens with that. But right now, none of the stories seem to be anything other than conjecture. And I think that makes the United States look silly. I think it makes us look foolish. And I think it doesn't help anybody to have all this conjecture.
Could this be another attempt of making sure Trump won't be reelected should he run again in 2024?
Well, it certainly could be. I've seen that movie multiple times before. Again, I can't say with any certainty, but it's a fair question. And that's one of the reasons we should all take a step back and watch rather than accuse.
Now, seeing the allegations against both Trump and Netanyahu, do you think there's a witch hunt against them both?
Look, politics is a dirty game. I learned that when I went to Washington. So I don't think that's an unfair statement. Some news media organizations are honest and ethical and do what they need to do to get real news out to the public. And unfortunately, there are some media organizations, right to left, it doesn't matter where they stand, who will use their platform in order to attack and undermine political candidates. And I don't, Bibi Netanyahu and Donald Trump are, controversial to some. So if they're going to use those tactics, who better to use it against than those two?
And will we see former President Trump coming back to the White House in 2024? And will you come back to 2024 to the White House also to complete your mission to bring peace to the Middle East?
Great question. I get that more and more these days, I guess, because President Trump's poll numbers are going higher and higher. Hard to say. Right now I'm enjoying life, enjoying my wife and kids. But if the role would be similar to the role I had before, it would be hard to say no.
Former White House Envoy Jason Greenblatt, thank you for this special interview.
Thank you for having me.